Good afternoon and welcome to our installment of the Water Seminar Series. My name is Ran Kalam and I'm the Dean's Chief Ambassador for the UC Riverside School of Public Policy, and I will be serving for your MC for today's water seminar titled Crisis or Cooperation: Colorado River Perspectives from an Urban Water Supplier. This seminar is a part of the water economics and policy outreach activities of the UCR School of Public Policy called Water Dialogue: Getting to Know Your Water Agencies and Policymakers, which is led by our very own Dr. Mehdi Namani. Water policy design and implementation involve the policymakers, the agencies that apply the policy, as well as the public that is subject to the policy. California has long been subject to many water policy interventions. Opening a dialogue amongst the public, the water agencies, and the policymakers would enhance the implementation of better and more effective water policies. You can learn more by going to waterdialogue.ucr.edu. Before I bring up our special guest, I will briefly go over the format of our presentation. First, our guest speaker will present for about 30 to 45 minutes. From there, we will hold an audience Q&A for about 15 minutes. If you're joining us virtually today, I ask that you please enter your questions via the Zoom webinar Q&A feature and not via the Zoom chat. If you are in the in-person attendance, I ask that you please go up to the middle aisle and offer your questions to the mic. Without further ado, I would now like to tell you about our guest speaker for today's seminar. Mr. Brad Coffey serves as the Chief of Water Resources for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. In his role, his team plans for the region's water supply, manages imported and local water resource program, and advances water use efficiency, as well as preparing for droughts and a challenging climate change ahead. Mr. Coffey has about more than 30 years of work experience in improving water quality and reliability of Southern California's water supply. He has earned his degree from Virginia Tech and the University of Southern California. He previously had been a guest on our Policy Shots podcast, and we are so delighted to welcome him back. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Brad Coffey to the stage.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all and to be here with students, because you're just at the beginning of your careers, and I like to work on problems that can't be solved in my lifetime, but maybe they can be solved in your lifetime. So what we're going to talk about today is developments and some history of the Colorado River. So my company, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, was formed in 1928 for the express purpose of building an aqueduct to bring Colorado River water into Southern California. Southern California had the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which had been built a couple of decades earlier. But in order to access that imported water, one had to be annexed into the city of Los Angeles. So the surrounding cities wanted to form together and form a cooperative that could do what any one agency could not do. And that was to build our aqueduct. So first, we had to survey the desert. This was uncharted, unmapped territory. So survey crews had to be sent out. Then these are just some pictures of the construction. This is of the aqueduct where the water is just flowing open air. This is a picture of a siphon, which is where it allows water to get over small hills or under valleys. And this is a picture of kind of cut and cover pipeline. This is about 14 feet in diameter, I believe. And then we built 5 pumping plants from the Colorado River to near Chirrocco Summit. And if you're going out to Interstate 10, going east on Interstate 10, once you get to that rise near Chirrocco Summit, if you look off to your left, you can see this pumping plant, although there's now 9 pipes going up instead of just that one. This pumping plant lifts the water over 450 feet And the total of all 5 of the pumping plants lifts the water about 1,800 feet from the river, and then the water flows by gravity through the rest of our system. So from this pumping plant, water can go to South Orange County, can go to the Mexican border, can go to Los Angeles Airport, can go to Pasadena. And so this was really designed in a pretty amazing way to be able to distribute the water by gravity. So there wasn't only innovation in construction, but there was innovation in healthcare. Now, the person's name escapes me at the moment, so let me just look really quick. What we have here, well, I'm not going to find it, is Dr. I can't remember his name, sorry. This is a doctor who took care of the 5,000 workers on the Colorado River Aqueduct and the only full-time nurse. This nurse was really hardy and, in fact, did something that nurses at that time could not do. And that was to give intravenous infusion to employees who were suffering from dehydration in the desert heat. The doctor was going out of business, however, and they then began to think of what's a prepay option that you could do for the healthcare. And so each worker for a nickel a day could receive free healthcare. And this model is what turned into Kaiser Permanente at the beginning. So this, if you read about Kaiser Permanente, this is their root. So the company I work for, Metropolitan Water District, is a public agency. It's a cooperative of 26 member agencies. And we're the largest wholesale provider of water in the country. Our service area is 19 million people. It spans a 5,200 square foot service area in parts of 6 different counties. So from Port Hueneme all the way down to the Mexican border. We have 26 member public agencies. As a wholesaler, we don't individually serve customers, but for example, we would serve water to Western Municipal Water District, which probably serves this campus. And the Southern California region has an economy of $1.6 trillion, which would be larger than all but 11 countries in the world. So it's a tremendous economy. And so the stakes are high for us on water. So the Colorado River Aqueduct, on average, we bring about 20% of our water supply into Southern California. We also bring water from Northern California, from the Feather River, through the State Water Project. But I want to also note that half of the water supply in Southern California is locally sourced. Now, that does include the Los Angeles Aqueduct, and to us, that's a local water, even though it's imported. And that includes groundwater and seawater desalination, recycled water. Now, one of the things that we've worked hard on is to improve water efficiency. And this graph shows the amount of water use in the region on a per person per day basis. So in the early 1990s, right about when I started at Metropolitan, there was about 200 gallons per person per day that was used in Southern California. Through efficiency gains, through changing out of old higher flush toilets with lower flush toilets, through increased recycled water use, we've driven that down by 40% to about 120 gallons per person per day. So keep that in perspective as we're talking about things that are going on the Colorado River and how we've been able to manage and reduce the use of water per person. So our water comes from 2 different watersheds, the Colorado River watershed and the State Water Project watershed. Now, just the northern part of the State Water Project watershed produces as much water on average as the entire Colorado River watershed, because the watersheds are quite different. But today we're just going to focus on the Colorado River watershed. It's a 1,400-mile long river, starts in Wyoming, receives most of its snowpack from the western Rockies in Colorado mostly, and then feeds 7 states and 2 countries. So the Republic of Mexico is also served by the Colorado River. So I'm going to talk a lot about acre feet. That's an old agricultural term, and that's pretty much how people in the water world, at least in the West, talk about water volumes. So a farmer would know that, say, to grow alfalfa, it would take 5 feet of water per year. And so for each acre, that would be 5 acre feet. In more modern parlance, it's about a little bit less than a 1 football field, 1 foot deep of water, 326,000 gallons, enough for 3 Southern California households for a year. So the Colorado River is governed by the law of the river, and we'll talk about that in some detail. It serves 40 million people, 6 million acres of farmland, and generates tremendous amounts of hydroelectricity. That's from Lake Mead at Hoover Dam and Lake Powell at Glen Canyon Dam. The storage in the river is 60 million acre feet. So that's about 5 years worth of flow, 5 or 6 years worth of flow. And so there's tremendous storage capacity, although right now it's only about 35% full. It's the annual total allocation on the river is 16.5 million acre feet. That's how much is appropriated to the different parties. And we'll see later, the main issue is that there's not that much water in the river to be had. 70% of the water in this watershed is used by agriculture, and we'll talk some more about that. So the law of the river is actually a bunch of different things kind of bundled together that numbers and numbers of attorneys try to figure out. So it started with the Colorado River Compact in 1922, and it includes agreements, a treaty with Mexico, the Supreme Court decision of Arizona versus California. By the way, Arizona lost that one. And all the way up to 2019, where we had certain actions for reacting to the drought. These in blue are the ones that I'm going to spend a little bit of time on. But if you want to have one take home for all of the Colorado River, all the law of the river, it's this. The 7 states can do what 7 states can agree to do. The Colorado River is the most regulated river in the world, and it's in essence formed by agreements by the states in the watershed and to receive its water and the Republic of Mexico. Okay, so we're going to go to 1922, where the Colorado River Compact, and you're actually in this compact are the seeds of the problem that we have today. So it divided the basin into 2 parts, divided at Lee's Ferry, which was a ferry boat that would cross people, that would allow people to cross across the Colorado River. And it's located just downstream from Lake Powell. And it said 7.5 million acre feet for each of the 2 basins. And an important thing that it also said was that the upper basin has to release 7.5 million acre feet on average if the lower basin needs it. So they have a compact call of 75 million acre feet on a rolling 10-year average. And then the upper basin also has to provide half of the Mexico treaty water. Now, there wasn't a treaty with Mexico at this time, but they were foreseeing the development of a treaty. Now, the next part was the Boulder Canyon Act in 1928. And that refined things a bit further in the lower basin. And it divided up that 7.5 million acre feet between California, Arizona, and Nevada. And California has the most senior water rights on the river, or a higher priority than the other states because of the time and the manner in which they developed and used, it's called perfecting, their water right. And the lower basin also has to split any Mexico treaty delivery. It is split between Arizona and California. So half comes from the upper basin, a quarter from California, a quarter from Arizona. So in 1932 or 34, they were beginning to build Parker Dam, which is one of the regulating reservoirs that allows us to pump the water from the Colorado River. And it started constructing from the California side. The problem was that Arizona had not yet signed that agreement. And they were determined to not let California build that bridge. They went to the Supreme Court, they went to Congress, and in fact, the governor of Arizona declared a state of emergency and sent troops to prevent California and the federal government from constructing that dam. You see the lady on the right, she owns some of these river boats, and she became an admiral, and her 2 river boats were there also to fight against the project. One of the problems was that the river boats got snagged on some construction equipment, so California had to go rescue Arizona's Navy. Now, ultimately, these things were settled through those later decisions, but you just can get a sense of what the conflict was like at that time. So much that you would send an armed group to prevent the dam. So it was very controversial. So in 1931, we're gonna zoom in on California now. We started upper basin, lower basin, then looked at between the states in the lower basin, California, Arizona, and Nevada. Now we're looking into California. And this 7-party agreement provided the first 3 priority uses: Palo Verde Irrigation District, the Yuma Project, and Imperial Irrigation District, Coachella Valley Water District, 3.85 of the 4.4 million acre feet of water. Now, it wasn't quantified between those, but Imperial Irrigation District was using the lion's share of the water. And then fourth and right, because of the time in which we were developing the water supply, was Metropolitan Water District with 550,000 acre feet. Now, one of the intricacies of water law in the West is that water flows along both downhill and down along a priority system. So water that Palo Verde Irrigation District didn't use flows down to the next right holders. And we were able to pump about 1.25 million acre feet until the early 2000s because of that surplus water. So in 1944, we signed a treaty with Mexico, and treaties have to be approved by United States Congress, Senate, 2/3 of the Senate, but they're really enabled by what's called minutes. So minutes are like specific enabling parts of a treaty. So the United States agreed to deliver 1.5 million acre feet of water to Mexico in a dry year. And in turn, Mexico would have to share surplus or shortage with the United States. And the most recent treaty minute, which expires in 2026, provides the mechanism and the rules for that sharing between Mexico. Mexico, in this treaty, it was both the Colorado River and the Rio Grande River along Texas. Those both were covered by this treaty. So let's fast forward to the quantification settlement agreement. And you've seen this slide where I mentioned that the water flows down along the priority system. So we were cut back by the Secretary of Interior from that 1.25 million acre foot capacity down to our right of 550,000 acre feet at the beginning of 2002. That was a scramble for us because we lost like a quarter of our water supply, and we had to then more heavily rely on local sources and water from the State Water Project. We began developing some conservation programs where we would pay for conservation, say in Palo Verde Irrigation District, and would want the water saved by that in order to build us up from 550,000 acre feet. The problem was that that water that we paid to get conserved got soaked up by the other higher priority users. So really there was no way for an urban area to develop a water supply and conserve water off the Colorado without it being taken by another primarily agricultural district. And that's shown here where the Yuma project could take it, IID could take it, Palo Verde could take it, and nothing would come. So this quantification settlement agreement, one quantified the amount of water for Imperial Irrigation District and Coachella Valley Water District. Palo Verde Irrigation District didn't sign, so they have actually an unquantified amount of water, but they have a limit to the number of acres which they can irrigate. And it also allowed us to make these kind of deals where we could pay for conservation and be guaranteed of the water passing through the priority system. So that opened up a whole new world of water management. And we've got dozens of water management programs. I'll just focus on one for now. Again, the Palo Verde Irrigation District, unquantified water right. We worked with the Palo Verde Irrigation District and asked to enroll landowners in a fallowing program. And we paid a specific amount per acre for them to become enrolled in this land. By becoming enrolled, then they were encumbered in fallowing, depending on how we would call for the fallowing. So there's 91,000 acres of irrigated or irrigable land in Palo Verde Irrigation District. 26,000 acres of that were enrolled in the program. And then we can make a fallowing call no less than 25% of that land and no greater than 100% of that land. And the water savings from them not planting crops, primarily alfalfa, provides about 125,000 acre feet per year of conserved water, either to Metropolitan or to the river. Now, a little bit later in the talk, I'm going to talk about our agreements with the Bureau of Reclamation as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act spending. And so the next 3 years, we're actually going to operate this at its full 100% fallowing, but provide that water to the federal government because they will pay us for that. So the PVID fallowing, which I just mentioned, is in the purple, and our basic apportionment is at the bottom. Why 1.25 million acre feet? 1.25 million acre feet is basically the limit, the hydraulic limit of water that we can move through the aqueduct. And even at that, on all of the pumps running, the water is lapping at the edges of the aqueduct, just a few inches from the top of the aqueduct. Why we want that 1.25 million acre feet capacity when we need it is because of severe droughts on the State Water Project and locally. So our goal is to build up 900,000 acre feet per year of water that we can reliably bring into Southern California and be able to have programs that we can turn on to bring in 1.25 million acre feet during a drought. So as the drought was kind of gathering steam, and droughts are always slow moving disasters, as that was gaining steam, these interim guidelines for the management of the river went into effect. And there's a lot of elements of them, but basically it established triggers of water elevation in Lake Powell and Lake Mead that when reached, there would be specific cutbacks. And Arizona, for example, would be cut back much more than California because California had the more senior water right. But California was also participating, and if the levels in Lake Mead went down even further, California would have to not take that water and leave it in Lake Mead. One of the other things that it did, which is really a boon to the Colorado River, is it created accounts for storage in Lake Mead, and it's called intentionally created surplus. So if we in the basin build a water recycling plant that reuses, say, 50,000 acre feet of water per year, then we can, if we don't divert that water, we can then store that water in an account in our name in Lake Mead. And at the end of this year, we're going to have around 1.4 million acre feet of water, which would fill our aqueduct for at least 3 years. Another way of saying that is there's about the top 20 feet or so of Lake Mead is water that we've stored in the lake. So through the interim surplus guidelines, the elevations of Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell and Hoover Dam really make a difference. There's a balancing rule of how much water to release from Lake Powell, and there's cutbacks depending on the elevation. One of the things that we really have to protect is what we call the power pool. So there's tremendous amounts of hydroelectricity generated, but if the water level goes down too much, then the turbines won't spin and we lose that generation capacity. So how much water are we really talking about that's being used? These bars to the top of them show what the appropriated amount is, and the blue shows for about the last 5 years how much water of that right is being used. You can see, for example, that California is using the vast amount of its 4.4 million acre feet, whereas Colorado has not yet developed and used their full allotment of 3.86 million acre feet. Colorado's intent, and that includes like the city of Denver and all the Front Range cities, is to be able to use that additional water that they have a right to in the upper basin. And that's another kind of like seed of our structural deficit. So the upper basin in general is using 4.2 million acre feet over the past few years and 6.9 million acre feet in the lower basin. Another thing to say is most of the precipitation and most of the runoff comes from Colorado, and they have a much lower amount of water supply, appropriated amount, than California. And California's watershed on the Colorado River is tiny. So there's almost no water produced for the Colorado River from California. The vast majority is produced in Colorado. So after the quantification settlement agreement, there was more incentive to conserve and to put water into Lake Mead. And there's been improvements in, say, water use efficiency in the cities, and some reduction in the amount of farming or fallowing. And so you can see since the year 2000, the amount of water each year in million acre feet used by California, Arizona, and Nevada. You see that big step at about 2003. That was that point where the Secretary of Interior said, you'll only get, Metropolitan, you'll only get 500,000 acre feet, 550,000 acre feet. And so basically almost that entire amount was provided, was taken from the surplus that we were previously enjoying. So how's the water used? I got this graphic from the New York Times. I think it's really instructive. So all of the Colorado flow is on the left and its uses on the right. So basically growing crops for livestock, hay and alfalfa primarily, use 56% of the river's flow that's apportioned. All the other crops like cotton or corn for grain, barley, uses about 24%. And all of the commercial, industrial, and residential uses, all of the urban uses, total 21%. So 80% in this figure is being used by agriculture and 20% by the cities. And if you remember, the urban area of Southern California has an economy greater than all but 12 nations on Earth. And we're using a relatively small amount of water from the Colorado River. Now, we've been working with irrigation districts to be able to conserve water that then can flow through the priority system. And we've been able to build up our whole Colorado River aqueduct flow. And we want to maintain thriving agricultural communities. So we oppose and won't say buy farmland and permanently fallow it because of the impact it would have on its communities. So we're looking for new and innovative ways in order to reduce that livestock use of water primarily, so that there's less of a structural deficit in the river. So I talked about structural deficit a couple of times. I said there was a very early act in 1932 that really got us going on the structural deficit. So let's do the math. So remember that Lake Powell has to reduce 75 million acre feet in every 10-year running period. So in a year, they have to, at maximum, release 7.5 million acre feet. They also have to provide half of the water being delivered to Mexico. So then all that water flows to the lower basin. And the lower basin's contract volumes include Arizona, California, Nevada, New Mexico, the 4.4 or the 7.5, and then net system losses. What is net system losses? Primarily, it's evaporation. And for some reason, in the developing of these compacts, no one took evaporation in the lower basin into account. And several feet of water every year in Lake Mead evaporates. And so the water that's released from Powell basically can't be released from Lake Mead. And if you see the total releases of 8.25 million acre feet minus the total demand of say 9.5 million acre feet, there is the structural deficit. Over time, the levels in Lake Mead will go down and go down. unless we do something about this. Now, that's assuming that the river would produce as much water estimated it would in the early 1900s. It just so happens that that period of measurement was particularly wet on the Colorado River. And so they overestimated what was the amount of average flow that the Colorado River would see. So the US Bureau of Reclamation is using amount of water of 13.2 million acre feet. That's well below 16 and a half. And that's based on the actual hydrology, we call it a stress test, from a 22-year period, a very dry period on the Colorado. But there are other estimates of water that we may need to consider. For example, Utah State has looked at tree ring records and gone back, and it's basically called paleohydrology, and been able to estimate the river's flow or the wetness of the area every year back to at least 1,500 years ago. So they're able to, with modern technology, look at what droughts might have been and were there. And we discovered that in this stress test, it was a drought not seen in all but 1,200 years. But there are worse droughts out there. So it all depends on what level of average water use in the basin that impacts the structural deficit. Now, climate change's impact on the Colorado River Basin is mostly temperature driven. And it's mostly, not that there's less snow that falls, but the snow evaporates more, so transpires or sublimates, and then plant growth is earlier. And what happens is for every degree centigrade increase in temperature, the stream flows into the Colorado River decrease by 9%. So when you think about global climate change and where we're trying to target climate impacts and the number of degrees centigrade increase, every degree, that's 9% less flow into the Colorado River. So US Bureau of Reclamation is proposing to modify the interim surplus guidelines because the conditions on the river were so poor. They had an initial proposal last fall that did reductions based on the priority system or reductions on a pro rata basis to the states. Both of those ended up being really bad for many of the cities who have lower priority rates. If you do it based on the priority system, the cities kind of dry up much sooner than agriculture. And even on a pro rata basis, the impact on urban areas and urban economy is really significant. So when it looked like the Colorado River was in immediate threat, as opposed to this longer term threat, they proposed this. And then we had this past winter, 171% of average stream flow going into the Colorado, and even better than that in the Sierras. So when we bring water in from Northern California, we lay off of our use of Colorado River water. So a couple of months ago, they dumped this initial proposal, basically because hydrology had changed so much that they didn't need to do these dire actions between now and 2026. In a revised proposal the Bureau has out there now, and the comment period on that proposal closes on December 11th, I believe. It's basically a proposal that was developed by the lower basin states. In essence, the lower basin states are responsible for much of the structural deficit. And it includes a commitment, an enforceable commitment to reduce by at least 3 million acre feet of water between 2023 and 2026, And up to 2.3 million acre feet of that water would be funded by the federal government under the Inflation Reduction Act. So here's kind of a quick primer to the Inflation Reduction Act, at least as it pertains to water. $4 billion was allotted for water in the West. And this $4 billion was primarily for Colorado River drought mitigation. And it has to be spent within a certain number of years. So never before had this much federal money come in absent when they were actually constructing the initial dams. So they've developed a couple of programs that we're calling buckets. And the first two, bucket 1A and bucket 1B, are short term. So they're meant to just prop up the level of Lake Mead through 2026. Bucket 2 is longer term and is for a 30-year agreement. So we've put proposals in for all of these buckets with our partners, and I'll show you kind of the net result. These are our different proposals that we've submitted. I wrote this one, well, I was responsible for developing all of these, but most recently, that bucket 2 proposal, we're asking for about $420 million and to conserve 500,000 acre feet through 2020 in the long term. And so all of these things totaled for Metropolitan Water District would be 920,000 acre feet, almost 1 million acre feet. So if all this funding comes through and we're successful in these proposals, we'll be helping the river between now and 2026 by nearly 1 million acre feet. So that's kind of the short term. The interim guidelines that I talked about expire in 2026. And we're now also negotiating probably another set of interim guidelines or a longer term guideline. I'm hoping we can get at least a 30-year agreement. And so what's important to urban interests? Well, number one is to preserve that conservation and ability to move it through the priority system that was in the quantification settlement agreement. We also would like that type of transfer to occur between states and between the upper basin and the lower basin. We also want to be able to preserve the ability for that intentionally created surplus, that 1.4 million acre feet of water that's stored in Lake Mead. We want to provide that incentive for water agencies to conserve water and add to the volume of Lake Mead in their name. Also, just as a backstop, we want to make sure that the regions aren't reduced below what we consider a health and safety amount of water of 55 gallons per person per day. Now, this means no outdoor water, but that's kind of like the minimum floor that we feel that could ever be taken by the cities. And of course, we're always looking for money. So there's a complex set of negotiations, and you can only imagine this. There's a negotiation between the United States and the Republic of Mexico. There's a negotiation between the upper basin states and the lower basin states. There's a negotiation between the lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada. And there's a negotiation for the California water users. So what was that? Interstate, upper, lower, between the states in California, like 5 different negotiations that have to be going on basically at the same time. And that leads to a lot of complexity. We have a team that does a lot of analysis on the Colorado River so we can see the nuances of different proposals rather quickly. And we are prepared to be negotiating for a longer term settlement by 2026. one of the things I actually really appreciate a lot of the academic work that's gone on to help us understand and manage the Colorado River. But there's a limitation to the academic work. And the primary limitation is in academia, you're basically telling other people what to do with other people's money and water. And so the stakes are really high for us here with real water, real money. For water resources for Metropolitan Water District, I manage a budget of about $1 billion each year for importing the water and all of our water supply programs. So the stakes are high. And that's all the slides I have prepared, and I'd be happy to address any questions. Questions are fair game.
Thank you again, Mr. Coffey. So if anyone in the in-person audience would like to come up to the middle aisle and speak into the mics, the Zoom audience can hear you. And then for our Zoom webinar audience, if you have any questions, please once again enter your question via the Q&A feature so that I'll pose that question to our speaker.
Hi, my name is Daniel Crespo. I am a postdoctoral researcher in the School of Public Policy. Thank you for the presentation. First, I'd like to one question. Right? If we think in climate change, I think that we will have less water. And if we think in the future of the cities, I think in more population, more people living there. Right? As you said before, during 20 years, the water use per capita in the cities was important reduction. And on the other hand, we have the supply. But we think that we have less water now and in the future. So I was wondering how we can, in one hand, if it is the possibility to reduce the water use per capita in the cities, and on the other hand, if we have the possibility to expand the water supply, and what is the cost, what are the trade-offs between desalination or alternative cheapest water use. The idea is we have room for more.
Great question. And the long-term impact on the Colorado is that 9% stream flow depletion every degree centigrade. But that's kind of like the average. And there would also be more specific swings from year to year. Now, to your question about the cities, the efficiency gains that we've had have basically made up for all of the population with less than or equal to the same amount of water. The city of Los Angeles has grown by 1 million people since in the 1980s and uses less water now than it did then in total. There's still efficiency gains to be had. In particular, one that we're looking at in urban areas is eliminating non-functional turf. So non-functional turf is commercial, industrial areas, medians that have water or that have grass on them, and that require about 40 gallons per square foot per year of water to water. And so we have programs where we incentivize people to convert those lawns into more California friendly. We won't really be able to generate any more water on the river, but we can generate ideas. One idea is to expand these types of programs where urban areas can incentivize agricultural areas to conserve water. In Wyoming, for example, you may get one cutting of alfalfa in a season using center pivot irrigation, where you get 5 cuttings of alfalfa in Southern California, in Palo Verde Valley. So ways of working together to move the water around in the system while not depleting the economic benefit of agriculture. One other thing that has come up in the past couple of years is we're working with Las Vegas, so Nevada, and Central Arizona Water Conservation District, which is a Central Arizona project, on a project that's located in Carson, California. So at Carson, there's one of the largest discharges of treated wastewater to the ocean on the entire West Coast. And we have a project that we're developing where we would recycle up to 150,000 acre feet per year of that water and reuse it. Now, Arizona and Nevada have said, hey, I want a piece of that action. So we have initial letters of intent, and they've provided some funding for the environmental work where they would buy into production of that water recycling plant in lieu of that, and we would lay off of a like amount of Colorado River water. So in this way, other urban areas can look to other ideas in the Colorado Basin, and with storage and with transfers can get that. So, Las Vegas could also propose a ocean desalination plant, say in Mexico, and that type of agreement could also improve their water supply. However, of course, there's a lot of environmental concerns with seawater desalination. Was that responsive to your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have another question from an online attendee, and they ask, how does the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California balance long-term sustainability goals with pressing short-term issues?
Great question, and that's my job. There's a couple of things that we're doing. One is we want to be good consumers of climate science. We're not climate scientists, but we want to understand what the climate scientists are projecting. We also know that the future is uncertain. So our most recent planning cycle, we've used scenario planning, where we've taken two different assumptions about climate effects, which is the relative concentration pathway 8.5 and relative concentration pathway 4.5. It's basically the reflecting of different amounts of solar radiation due to greenhouse gases. And then different economic conditions, like what's the future of growth in Southern California? Is it going to remain flat? Is it going to go down? Is it going to go up? And so we look at those scenarios. And the one scenario that's the most dire has rapid climate change on the supply and rapidly increasing demand on imported supplies. And so we are planning for that potential. We're not building for that potential, but right now we have a climate adaptation master plan for water that is giving us a way of holistically looking at the options available to us and the investments available to us. And we typically plan in 25-year increments, but we're also now, kind of like pinging out to 2100. It occurred to me not long ago as I was holding a friend's baby, baby Violet, that baby Violet in all likelihood will be alive in the year 2100. And if you look at the projections of the water crisis by 2100, it gives you a sense of responsibility that we have to do something for Violet, and we don't want to leave her with a huge burden.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. I have two questions. One is, when you say what the state agreed to do, who are the people involved? Can you talk a little bit more about who from California is involved in decision making for when you are negotiating with other states? And the second question is, when you talk about the payment to the farmers per acre feet, can you also talk a little bit about how it's determined, how we come up with the dollar value of 400 or 300?
Right. Thank you for that question. I'll speak to each state has a slightly different way of representing themselves in these agreements. Some it's their lead of like the state's water resources group. Some it's a political appointee. In California, we have a Colorado River Board that's made up of the large Colorado River users of California and 2 people from the state. And the president of the Colorado River Board, Mr. Hanby, is the one who's actually the negotiator. So we're behind the scenes working within California, and California is speaking with one voice to the other lower basin states. And likewise, the lower basin states are speaking with one voice to the upper basin. At least that's what we try to do in theory. Sometimes one pulls away for a variety of reasons. But the environmental work and the choices that the Bureau of Reclamation now are looking at is a basin states proposal. So California, Arizona, and Nevada are all proposing a certain set of actions for that to come. Your other question about pricing, I would say it depends. If we want to produce water, say by incentivizing toilets or irrigation controllers, it costs us about $200 per acre foot to purchase that conservation. And we have rebate programs that do just that. If we want to give people $2 per square foot of turf that they remove the grass and put in California friendly landscape, that's about $500 an acre foot. If we're in dry year transfers during a severe drought, that's north of $900 an acre foot. So what kind of happens is both parties want some surety. And if you have a longer agreement, or for example, with the Palo Verde Irrigation District, we will always fallow and provide fallowing payments for 25% of the enrolled lands. And so we just kind of work those deals together. And in the IRA funding for the short term, many agencies are finding ways of participating for $400 an acre foot and actually are able to take some of those proceeds and reinvest in their system as well.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions for today. So I would just like to thank Mr. Coffey again for joining us for today's water seminar. We're truly appreciative of you taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us for this talk. So I think our audience members as well for joining us. We hope to see you at the next School of Public Policy event, which is actually tomorrow on December 7th. We will have our last seminar of the quarter, and it will be America's New Vaccine Wars by University of Western Australia Associate Professor Katie Appa. Additionally, stay tuned for our next water seminar, which will be in the new calendar year on January 31st, and we'll be featuring Dr. Greg Pierce from UCLA as a speaker. So you can learn more about events hosted like these ones at the UCR School of Public Policy website at spp.ucr.edu. While you're there, you can also learn of our Masters of Public Policy program, as well as our newly launched combined BA/FPP program. Additionally, you can listen or watch to our official policy podcast series, Policy Checks. Thank you again, everyone, for being with us today. We have some cookies and lemonades in the back, so please help yourself. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the holiday season. Thank you all.